Yet, as I say, that wrong turn, by taking it, I ended up finding the right road. And it would happen again and again in my career.
Kenneth M. Quinn is a former U.S. ambassador and lifelong advocate for global food security. After more than 3 decades in the Foreign Service, including serving as ambassador to Cambodia, he went on to lead the World Food Prize Foundation, championing innovations to help feed the world.
So I became impressed with citizen diplomacy as I saw specific examples of it. And it made me think about it this way. And citizen diplomacy, to me, is sometimes actions by an individual citizen. Could be actions by an organization that's not in the government. I consider it to be actions sometimes by state governments or universities that in some way impact or influence governments, and particularly foreign governments, as diplomats are meant to do. And can be official leaders, it can be the government institutions, but there are such remarkable stories about that, and I became so taken with them, I commissioned artwork, which is displayed here in the Iowa Gallery of the World Food Prize Hall of Laureates, because I was worried that a lot of these stories won't be remembered and people won't be aware of them. And by having an artwork about them, well, it's almost like writing a book. The artwork captures the story, and then the docents who will take people through on tours will tell those stories just because of what's in the artwork. So I see citizen diplomacy as having several different forms.
Before becoming a diplomat, the world beyond America was largely unfamiliar to Quinn, a reality that would soon change.
Had a very interesting youth. For 8 years, between 3rd grade and the end of high school, I lived in 7 different houses, went to 6 different schools in 5 different cities and in 4 states, as my dad was switching jobs. Started in New York City, did La Crosse, Wisconsin, Bloomington, Illinois, and as I was about to start high school, a week before I started high school, to Dubuque, Iowa. But I didn't have interaction growing up with foreign immigrants. I didn't have to learn any languages. I never flew on a plane until I was 23. Passing the Foreign Service exam and showing up in Washington, D.C., kid from Dubuque, Iowa, with a background quite different from almost everybody else. And the State Department sent me to Vietnam to be a rural development advisor. They gave me to USAID in rice-growing villages of Vietnam. So what an improbable assignment, an improbable role when I got off the plane in Saigon and, where am I? How did I get here? And what do I have to do next? So it was interesting. I was inspired by John Kennedy. I remember John Kennedy saying that if he hadn't gone to politics, he probably might have wanted to be a Foreign Service officer. And the Foreign Service test was free. Probably if it would have cost $15, I never would have taken it, but I took it, and wow, lo and behold, I passed. There I was, launched for 32 years career.
Arriving in Vietnam for the first time, Kenneth M. Quinn faced a world vastly different than the one he had known growing up.
First thing was that I studied Vietnamese for 10 months. The single hardest intellectual endeavor I ever undertook. And I wasn't a particularly good student, but when I got to Vietnam, my language skills weren't all that great, but I could go out and talk to people and have some exchanges, some sentences. I was being sent out into a province. I was out working as a village rural development advisor. So people say, oh, I see what was wrong in Vietnam, sending guys from the Bronx as rural agricultural development advisors. But going out in the villages and practicing my Vietnamese by talking to farmers, asking them about their experiences, I began to see and appreciate how change comes. Here I am, suddenly 10,000 miles from home, having the insight and understanding what transformed Iowa and Illinois and Indiana and all of the American Middle West and all of America. The road and seeds were this formula that became the substantive lesson of my life, and which I carried with me in all of my other assignments. Then had a visit by a journalist named Richard Swanson. I didn't know it at the time. He had previously worked as a photojournalist at the Des Moines Register, but he was doing stories for Time Life magazine. And my job was to take him out and show him these villages where with the roads and seeds, we were making such a big difference. So it was November 1969. The rainy season was over, but still overcast. It was a gray, kind of overcast day. We were in a small boat I had. One of the military members of our team was driving it. We're just talking, and he said, well, what are you going to be doing next? I said, oh, let me tell you, I'm going to Harvard, and then I'm going to be assigned in Western Europe and European labor movements. And this journalist asked me a question that changes the entire course of my life. He said, oh, why would you want to go and do that? Here you are in the epic event of your generation. You speak the language, you're able to step through the cultural veil, you're making a difference. Why would you want to go and write reports about labor movements that hardly anybody will care about or read in Washington? And I realized I had never been smart enough to ask myself that question. And I finally said to him, I don't know why I'd want to go and do that. I wrote to the State Department and I said, I don't want to go to Harvard. I don't want to study European labor movements. I don't want to be assigned in Western Europe. I want to stay in Vietnam. I saw what I could contribute to our country through the Foreign Service could be my work out in rural villages, not in the salons of Europe. They approved it, and I ended up staying there for 5.5 years and had this amazing array of experiences. And it just changed the whole trajectory of my life, my professional career. So that was my interaction out with these farmers, seeing, learning from them, absorbing that experience, and understanding that it's what you can do through, whether it's through a government program, but through other programs and citizen diplomacy, is how you can impact the world. And had I been assigned stamping visas someplace, had I been assigned to work in the embassy in Saigon, never would have happened. When I was going off to that assignment, I thought it was the wrong turn for me. I didn't have interest in going to Asia. I didn't want to be involved in the war, and yet, as I say, that wrong turn by taking it, I ended up finding the right road.
Mm-hmm.
And it would happen again and again in my career. For those who are, young and thinking about career, and some opportunity comes up and you say, oh, it's not what I want to do, and you never know, because you may discover something about yourself, which is what happened to me. I say why I was put on the earth to do was to go and work in villages and absorb and learn from them, and to help shape and influence, my country's policies through those experiences.
Sounded like it wasn't necessarily a wrong turn, but maybe just a redirection that changed your life and the lives of millions of people.
In the middle of my State Department career, I said, I want to go back to Iowa, look around. I don't know if I want to keep doing this diplomacy thing. Go back to Iowa. I always felt kind of a pull.
After decades in the Foreign Service, Ambassador Quinn eventually returned home to Iowa. But diplomacy didn't stop there. In fact, some of the most unexpected moments in U.S.-China relations would unfold far from Washington, right here in the American Midwest.
So they had a Pearson Fellowship program, and I signed up for that and was assigned to the office of Governor Robert Ray. President Carter invited 6 governors, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, senior individuals, including Governor Ray, to go to China on the first delegation of exchange by governors. And so Governor and Mrs. Ray went, and he could bring 1 aide, so he brought me along. So I got to go to China for the first time. I got to have an exchange with Deng Xiaoping about the Khmer Rouge and the radical communists in Cambodia, who Deng Xiaoping severely criticized to me. The trip was organized by the U.S. Council, U.S. National Council for U.S.-China Relations.
In 1980, a visiting Chinese delegation arrived in Iowa, led by the governor of Guangdong Province. His name was Xi Jinping, father of Xi Jinping. What happened during that visit would become one of the earliest stories of citizen diplomacy between the United States and China.
It's arranged for the Chinese governors are going to come through Iowa. And so on, I think it was October 26, 1980, the governors were coming from New York City. And we went out to the airport to meet them. And the governor that got off was the governor of Guangdong Province, which was a place where China was experimenting with new possibility of introducing free markets to China in a place called Shenzhen. And the governor was leading that group. I didn't know much about any of this, but we were there and we greeted him, and I got to escort him around and for a couple of days. It was Tuesday, October 28th, and that night was going to be presidential debate between Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter. So we wanted to get them back to Des Moines. So we were leaving, and we thought we'll just stop in the Amana colonies. We'll have a kind of traditional meal there. Everything, food was served family style, the way Amana was set up as communes originally. And so we booked one of those restaurants, and we stopped there, and the Chinese governors were enjoying it. And then part of the deal was we had to let the Amana take them to this little museum and let the representatives from Amana give them a briefing. And so we're sitting in what's like a classroom of a one-room school, and the governors are all at the table, and I'm off on the side. And the story of Amana is being described to them, how these were people who, in their religious beliefs, and they had lived in a total communal existence, came to Iowa in the late 19th century, but in the 1930s had somewhat reformed themselves and broke up the communes into individual family farms, but otherwise kept their culture and religion and social relate, all intact. The leader of the delegation, Governor Xi Jinping, governor of Guangdong, asks more questions about that experience in Amana than he did at every other stop put together. And I'm sitting on the side, puzzled. Why does he keep asking about the details? How was this done? What was the result of that? And all I could think was that they were so stunned and amazed to find out that there was once communism in America that he needed to have all these details, because otherwise his friends back in China are never going to believe this. But what I found out later was that in China and within the Chinese Communist Party, there was this incredible debate. They had tried free market economics in businesses in a place called the Shenzhen Special Zone, and kind of okay, but could that be introduced to agriculture? Because the fear within the Chinese Communist Party was that if we do that, we may return to all the terrible things, which was why we had a communist revolution. There'll be the exploitation of the peasants, they'll all lose their farms, they'll be taken away by absentee owners, and they'll go back to being poor peasants. Now, I wasn't in those debates, but I've had people from China say to me clearly what Governor Xi Jinping saw in 1980 in Amana had a huge impact, because Chinese agriculture looks exactly like what Iowa looked like in Amana after the 1930 reforms. From 1980 to 1993, with these new agricultural reforms that were introduced, farm communes broken up into individual farms, China had such an incredible exponential increase in agricultural production that in 1993, a plane lands in Des Moines, and the Minister of Agriculture, He Kang, gets off to receive the World Food Prize for China's incredible agricultural development. I was gone by 1985 when Xi Jinping, as a young 31-year-old, comes to Iowa, has this incredible citizen diplomacy experience in Muscatine, goes home, and in the next 30 years rises up to be vice president. I get a call from then Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack, who said, we want to have a symposium on U.S.-China agriculture, but rather than hold it in Maryland, we want to have it in Iowa, but only if we can have it in your brand new World Food Prize Hall of Laureates building. So I said, done. Xi Jinping comes escorted by Governor Branstad, goes to Muscatine, comes back that night. Governor Branstad hosts a dinner in his honor in the state capitol. We play a role in that because we've been holding dinners in the state capitol when we give the World Food Prize. So we helped organize that. And the next day, the symposium, U.S. High-Level China Agricultural Symposium, will take place in this building where you and I are sitting, the Norman Borlaug World Food Prize Hall of Laureates. So I have my moment. I'm the host. I get to go out. The car drives up. Xi Jinping gets out, and I'm going to escort him in the main door. You'll see the beautiful stained glass window and everything. But his people said, no, for security reasons, we have to go in through the service entrance. So, okay. So as we're walking in, I say to him through the interpreter, Mr. Vice President, you have such an interesting story. How you came to Iowa as a young man, 31 years old, and now you're Vice President of China. I'm going to commission a painting about your experience, and hang it here in my building. And I said, and by the way, Mr. Vice President, I just shook your hand, and I'm one of the few Iowans to shake your hand who also shook your father's hand when I escorted your father around Iowa in 1980. And Xi Jinping literally stopped in his tracks. And he turns and looks at me, and his eyes get big, and he gets a big smile, and through the interpreter he says, "You have two interesting stories." So at the bottom of that painting, here in the Iowa Gallery, in Chinese characters it says, "Two interesting stories." Now, the citizen diplomacy aspect, if I may, Xi Jinping was clearly so touched by the way he was treated, the impact of that interaction by those individual citizens in Muscatine who welcomed him when he was a nobody and treated him with such kindness and hospitality as Iowans do. In that 2023 trip to San Francisco, where we met with him first, that was followed by a very large dinner where Xi Jinping gave the address. And he spoke about memories of Iowa. He even said, "I remember the address of the home where I stayed with the family in Muscatine." And he talked about family and people-to-people relationships. And then he talked about the problems in the world and made it clear that for him, that China wanted to work cooperatively on those issues. I believe that peace through agriculture, peace through cooperation, is a way to attain that.
Earlier you talked about sharing two interesting stories, but you shared a whole handful of them here, and thank you for that. You talked about those two stories that will go down not only in the history of US-China relations, but in the history of our state. I wanted to ask, what do you see the role of Iowa, specifically with regards to subnational and citizen diplomacy, playing in the quest towards this fulfillment or eradication of world hunger and strengthening of US-China relations?
So if you were to pick one place in the world where the trends of human history pass through, I would argue that place is Des Moines, Iowa. I believe that Norman Borlaug, father of the Green Revolution, grew up on a farm up in Howard County, northeast Iowa. On the base of his statue in the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., put in by the state of Iowa, it says, "The man who saved 1 billion lives." In India, people tell me that Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, with Norman Borlaug, spread the Green Revolution across India in the early 1960s. When India and South Asia were facing, the prospect of hundreds of millions would die of famine, starvation. And the Green Revolution turned it away. The Green Revolution was the single greatest period of food production and hunger reduction in all human history. M.S. Swaminathan was the first World Food Prize laureate. There's a 10-foot high mosaic of him downstairs. If you go to mainland China, you can ask anybody, they know who is Yuan Longping. Every Chinese in mainland China knows he is the father of hybrid rice and the man whose breakthrough innovations helped stave off hunger and famine in China. He was 2004 World Food Prize laureate. The only time those three individuals, arguably the three greatest agricultural scientists in the history of China, India, and America, and indeed of the world, were ever together was in 2004 at the World Food Prize in Des Moines. All of their history comes through this building. There are many other places where they did great things and they're honored. But if you're looking for the place where the trends of history come together, this is the place. This is the history, the inspiration, the legacy where you can come and be inspired to greatness.
And it's Des Moines, it's not Washington, it's not about politics, it's about people.
Exactly.
Yet another example of how people-to-people exchanges can serve as this bridge between cultures,
Exactly.
even when the countries don't have geopolitical relations. No diplomatic
Exactly.
relations.
Exactly. Peace through agriculture.
Incredible.
The place where you can make that change, maybe not in a master's program on international politics. It may be on that undergraduate or master's program in agriculture and life sciences and malnutrition, and combining science and food and alleviating poverty and hunger and uplifting people. We need to have the professional diplomats, but we need to have the professional citizen diplomacy participants and advocates, and who are, through their life and through what they study and the professions they achieve, are building those connections. One thing that Norman Borlaug said is hungry people never sit still. They will move, and they will, in their mass migration, they will find a way. You can build all the walls, and that people who are hungry will scale those walls, will land on those shores desperately in search of food. But I believe students and in many different places that they can be a powerful force in that regard.
So it sounds like, to wrap everything up, the overarching theme of the interview has been that food is the future, youth is the future, and through food we can find peace.
Amen.
Thank you for your time. This has
Sure.
been an interview with Ambassador Ken Quinn. Thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned for our next Citizen Diplomacy feature.